Over the years, countless mysterious and unexplained events have taken place. But which of these are truly the most astonishing and captivating? Today, we'll see if reality can outdo fiction. We'll start with the less chilling events, and as we move forward, the topics will grow darker and more unsettling. This first event feels like something straight out of a movie, yet to this day, more than a century later, it remains an unsolved mystery. So, what are we talking about? The year is 1876, in Bath County, Kentucky. On the morning of Sunday, March 3rd, Mrs. Crouch was walking just a few steps outside her house when she felt a strong gust of wind. Moments later, she heard an unusual sound behind her. Turning to see what was happening, she noticed something unbelievable. Large chunks of meat were falling from the sky, one after another, all around her. Panicking at this bizarre sight, Mrs. Crouch ran to find her husband, and minutes later they both witnessed what would become one of the greatest mysteries in American history. The rain lasted several minutes, leaving the field covered in pieces of meat. It wasn't just surprising to see, it was an absolute mess, with chunks scattered everywhere. These pieces measured between 2 and 4 inches and covered an area of about 320 foot squares. A couple of hours later, neighbors and townsfolk arrived at the scene. Some men even tasted the meat, oddly claiming it resembled venison or lamb. In the days that followed, the event was reported in major newspapers across the country, but this raises the question, what could have caused this bizarre occurrence? Given the time period, it would have been impossible for an airplane to have dropped any cargo, as the first flight didn't take place until 1903. So, in the days that followed, Bath residents started investigating the phenomenon, and theories started pouring in. Some claim the meat came from cosmic animals, or that a meat-filled asteroid disintegrated in the atmosphere. Yes, it sounds absurd, but there's more. A scientist decided to take one of the meat chunks for analysis. After a few hours, he claimed it was lung tissue from a child, a disturbing conclusion, though the theory was ultimately dismissed. Another popular theory suggested that vultures were feeding on an animal when something startled them, causing them to fly off and drop the meat over the field. For many, this is the most plausible explanation, but it doesn't account for how the rain of meat could have lasted several minutes or covered an area the size of a football field. Furthermore, the Crouches insisted that during the rain, they looked up and saw no animals flying overhead. So, what really happened that day in Kentucky? And what caused this mysterious rain that even now, no one has been able to explain? The next event is similar to the last, but with an even darker twist. In the summer of 2008, Sandra Malone, a resident of British Columbia, was gathering stones along the coast when she suddenly saw a terrified woman running toward her from the distance. Sandra tried to help and understand what was wrong, so she called the police. Minutes later, when the officers arrived, they uncovered the reason behind the woman's terror. Just a short time before, she had seen what looked like a human foot lying on the riverbank. The police bagged the foot and took it in for investigation, but just a few hours later they discovered it wasn't a foot at all. Rather, it was an animal bone that had been placed in a sock stuffed with seaweed and put into a shoe. Clearly, this was a very disturbing prank. The reason behind this prank, however, is tied to a chilling phenomenon that has been occurring along this river since 2007. Every so often, human feet have been found washing ashore along the riverbanks between Vancouver and British Columbia. But what is the origin of this? And what more is known about the phenomenon? Okay, in total, 25 decomposing human feet have mysteriously appeared on the riverbanks. The first was found by a 12-year-old girl who was horrified. A week later, another foot washed ashore. Curiously, both were right feet wearing almost identical shoes. This prompted the police to launch an investigation, but after months of searching, they found no new leads. Across the years, more feet have continued to appear, without any clear explanation. The latest of these feet was found on July 23rd, 2023. A map has even been created to document each discovery, adding to the mystery. Some of these feet have been identified using DNA tests. For instance, one foot found in 2018 was traced back to a young man reported missing the previous year. But with others, there are no matches, and answers remain elusive. So, what are the theories behind these events? Most people believe this could be the work of a serial killer who disposes of their victims in parts over time. However, there's no hard evidence to confirm this theory. Another explanation, supported by scientists, is that these feet belong to people who had accidents and ended up in the water. But this theory has its own issues. It doesn't explain why no other body parts are found, or why the bodies are never recovered in full. So, what is the real explanation for this eerie phenomenon? Who or what is behind this eerie mystery? It's a series of events that are undeniably creepy. The following event is even more sinister and shrouded in mystery. On February 17, 2004, a man was walking through a shopping mall in Japan when he stopped at an ATM. Moments later, something unusual happened, and the man lost his life. As the investigation began, police soon realized they had made a serious error. What followed would be considered one of Japan's most mysterious events, one that remains unsolved to this day. But what exactly is the mystery we're exploring? Well, this incident took place in the city of Yokkaichi, at a mall called Jusko, a chain now known as Ion. One afternoon, an elderly man was shopping in the mall when he decided to withdraw some cash from an ATM. Unbeknownst to him, he was being followed. While the man was withdrawing money, a woman holding a baby began watching him closely. Now, this woman was been standing in the area for several minutes. The woman likely thought it would be an easy task to take the wallet from an elderly man, but she was in for a surprise. The man was unexpectedly strong, and she couldn't wrest the wallet from his grip. Frustrated, the woman began shouting for help, claiming the man was a thief. Bystanders turned to see the struggle, and three men, thinking the man was attacking her, intervened and knocked him to the ground. Meanwhile, the woman fled with the money. Soon after, someone called the police. But what could only be described as sheer bad luck followed. When two inexperienced officers arrived, they quickly restrained and handcuffed the elderly man, pushing him to the ground. He tried explaining that it was all a misunderstanding and that the woman who had just fled was the real thief. But the officers ignored his pleas. For several minutes, they restrained him forcefully, breaking his glasses in the process. The strain and stress took their toll, and the man began to suffer from a heart arrhythmia. Shortly after, his brain stopped functioning, and he passed away a day later in the hospital. A tragic case, no doubt, but this is where things take a mysterious turn. Days later, investigators from the police department began re-examining the case. They were particularly struck by the man's insistence on his innocence. They reviewed the security footage and quickly realized that he had been telling the truth. But as unsettling as this revelation was, what followed was even stranger. After a year of investigation with no leads, the police department released a photo, hoping someone might recognize the woman. These are the only two images that exist of her, and her appearance is chilling. Unfortunately, the photos are of poor quality, and since 2005, this case has remained one of Japan's most baffling mysteries. But there's more. The strangest part of this incident is that after analyzing additional security footage, the woman was never seen leaving the mall or even lingering nearby. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Witnesses also noted that she was dressed entirely in black, wore no mask, and was carrying a real baby. Beyond that, nothing more is known. This case has become known as the Jusko ATM ghost, a haunting and tragic mystery wrapped in an eerie disappearance.
Of people today phoned the ZBC and the BBC correspondent in Harare saying they sighted an unidentified flying object last night. We have some eyewitness reports.
There's no noise, and that's when I thought, well, there's something very odd here.
It was quite amazing. It was beautiful.
They are saying that Jesus is passing through Africa.
The next event is completely different from the others we've discussed today. For me, it's the most perplexing of all. What makes it so chilling is that, despite dozens of witnesses, authorities claimed it never actually happened. This took place at Ariel School in Zimbabwe. The date was September 14th, 1994, around 8:50 p.m. A loud explosion echoed across Zimbabwe, shaking the ground. The explosion lasted almost 20 minutes, leaving citizens convinced it was some kind of attack or similar event. But when people looked around to find the source, they saw nothing, and then suddenly everything returned to complete silence. Within a few hours, people moved on, and life resumed as normal. But what actually happened that night in Zimbabwe? The following day, the news reported that the noise was caused by a meteor shower. Yet many locals doubted this explanation, as nothing was visible in the sky. If it were a meteor shower, wouldn't it have been obvious? Students at Ariel School in the Ruwa community were on their morning break when something terrifying happened. While the children were playing on the playground and teachers were in a meeting, a strange sound echoed, a noise similar to what had been heard 2 nights before. Days later, school staff and other students described it as resembling electric cables buzzing or the sound of a swarm of bees. What could have caused this sound? Here's where the event becomes even more baffling. As the children played, some noticed an indescribable object approaching and descending among the rocks and plants a short distance from the playground. They reported that the strange electrical sound stopped the moment the object landed. Soon after, the children saw unusual figures inside the object. These beings, roughly 1.5 meters tall, were dressed in black suits and had distinctive features: small noses, large black eyes, and elongated heads. The children could hardly believe what they were seeing. Most of them ran to find their teachers, but a few stayed and experienced something inexplicable. Some reported seeing visions or images flash through their minds, while others claimed that making eye contact with these beings left them paralyzed, unable to move their limbs. Fortunately, the school bell rang, signaling the end of recess. The beings released the children from this state, allowing them to return to class in a state of panic. Now, this may sound unbelievable, but here's the interesting part. Over 60 children witnessed what happened, and in the months that followed, they were each interviewed several times. Some even underwent regression therapy, and in every session, they all repeated the same story without changing any details.
But I was looking straight into his eyes. Well, he never said anything. It's just that the face is the eyes.
Maybe they're trying to communicate with us, show us something which we don't know about.
I think they want people to know that we're actually making harm on this world and we mustn't get too technologized.
We don't.
Adding to the mystery, one of the experts conducting these sessions was Dr. John Mack, a highly respected psychologist and Pulitzer Prize winner, who also served as head of the psychiatry department at Harvard University. This incident sparked Mack's fascination with the UFO phenomenon, and he studied it for years, appearing on major television programs to discuss his findings. But in 2004, after giving a lecture in England, Mack was struck by a drunk driver and killed. Oddly enough, 3 other men with the exact same name died on the very same day. Could this really be a coincidence? The Ariel School incident is considered Africa's most famous paranormal event. To this day, it remains unproven and, despite numerous studies, has no satisfactory explanation. The next case holds an even graver mystery. This incident happened in the Hills of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and since then, nothing like it has been reported anywhere else in the world. It all began on August 20th, 1966, when a young boy flying a kite stumbled upon a scene that would become one of Brazil's most mysterious unsolved cases. The boy alerted the police, who investigated briefly before realizing that the area was difficult to access. Hours later, they returned with the fire department to clear a path through the dense underbrush. What they found left them baffled. Lying on the ground were 2 still bodies, each dressed in a suit and, strangely, covered by a raincoat. Uncanny, as it wasn't the rainy season. Initially, the police assumed it was a crime scene, but the discovery of a particular item added an unexpected twist to the investigation. Alongside the bodies, they found a pair of unusual goggles made of lead and a notebook filled with cryptic notes. Some entries listed precise times, while others made little sense. But one entry stood out and has remained a source of mystery. It read, Sunday, 1 pill after lunch. Monday, 1 pill after breakfast. Tuesday, 1 pill after lunch. Wednesday, 1 pill before bed. The police, delving deeper into the investigation of these two bodies, identified them as Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira, both electricians. As investigators sifted through the pages of a notebook found near the bodies, they discovered more and more disturbing clues. One of the notes mentioned the law of Ohm, the rule describing the relationship between voltage, current, and resistance. Yet, among other entries, there were sequences of coded information that to this day have remained undeciphered. The notebook also contained another note that read, at 4:30 p.m., be at the designated place. At 6:30 p.m., take the capsules. After the effects, await the signal with the masks on. It seemed that Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira were preparing for some kind of event. But what exactly they were expecting remains unknown. As the investigation continued, even more disturbing details came to light. The bodies showed no signs of struggle or injury, and no trace of poison or other toxins was found. The only unusual detail was a faint level of radiation on both bodies. However, given their profession, the exposure level was not deemed out of the ordinary. Further inquiries with the men's families only deepened the mystery. Both men had assured their wives that they would return soon. Miguel had told his wife he was buying materials for work, while Manuel claimed he was leaving to purchase a car. Neither had shown any unusual behavior leading up to that day. The lack of answers has left this case shrouded in mystery. Some believe they may have encountered extraterrestrial life, with the radiation found on their bodies serving as a potential clue. However, due to their line of work, this theory was ultimately dismissed. So, what really happened that day with Miguel and Manuel? The truth remains as elusive as the mystery itself. But the next case is by far more mysterious and terrifying. Over a century ago, 3 men found themselves on an island, and after a series of strange events, they disappeared without a trace. This incident remains one of the ocean's greatest mysteries, and personally it leaves me pondering. Off the west coast of Scotland lies a group of small islands known as the Flannan Isles, with the largest being Eileen Moore. In 1899, a lighthouse was constructed on this island, but just a year later, in December 1900, one of the most terrifying events in history unfolded. The lighthouse was manned by 4 men, 3 of whom were always on the island, with one rotating out every 2 weeks. On December 7th, 1 man arrived, while another left, with the next change set for 2 weeks later. However, something inexplicable occurred. On December 15th, the crew of a nearby ship noticed that the lighthouse was dark, a shocking anomaly, as lighthouses are supposed to be lit 24/7 to guide ships safely. Concerned but not yet alarmed, the ship's crew continued on their course. But on December 20th, the day the next rotation was due, a group of men attempted to reach the lighthouse. A thick fog had rolled in, making navigation impossible, forcing them to turn back. Later, they would describe this fog as being denser than usual. As the locals could not reach the lighthouse, they had to wait several more days. On December 26th, when they finally approached the island, they discovered several boxes of supplies left on the dock, supplies that should have been collected by the lighthouse keepers. This was the second unusual occurrence. The third strange thing was that the keepers did not come down to greet the arriving ship, which was part of the established protocol. The crew decided to fire a flare and whistle, expecting someone to respond. But after several minutes of silence, they decided to investigate the lighthouse itself. When they reached the outer door, they found it locked. Upon gaining entry, they discovered the interior was eerily empty. Each room was locked, and the beds were unmade. Strangely, in the kitchen, food was set on the table waiting to be eaten. The most alarming clue, however, was that 2 of the 3 men's overcoats were missing. Assuming the keepers had gone out and were somewhere on the island, the crew launched a search but found nothing. Their final stop was the west landing of Eileen Moore, where they found the area completely destroyed. So, what happened to the lighthouse keepers? The most unsettling piece of evidence was found in one of the men's diaries. This log contained a record of the lighthouse's operations and significant daily events. Within its pages, it revealed nothing out of the ordinary, just accounts of terrible weather and a thick fog like none before. Starting on December 13th, the entries noted the worsening conditions, with the final entries detailing the men locked inside, crying and pleading for God to calm the storm. The last entry, dated December 15th, the very day the nearby ship noted the lighthouse was dark, was written at 9 a.m. But the most chilling line of all was the last entry. The storm has passed. The ocean is calm. God is over all. To this day, the fate of the lighthouse keepers remains a mystery, inspiring a film based on this eerie event. What truly happened on December 15th at Eileen Moore? The answers remain lost to the waves. If you want to keep exploring, check out Disturbing Lost Media and YouTube channels with disturbing endings, each filled with stories as eerie as these. Thanks for watching. Until next time.